Once again, good afternoon, everyone. If I could ask all of you to please take a seat, that'd be great, so that we can kick off our next session here. I think we've talked a lot about our generation network, building out the plants on a global basis and things like that. But I think one area which is obviously very critical is how do you really think about moving this hydrogen? What is the right way to do that? How do you think about it from an economic standpoint, right? So, and I'm really super delighted to actually have two members of my team joining here. Kevin, who actually does M&A strategy, but now he leads the project development effort for Plug. So when we're talking about building hydrogen plant here in North America, Kevin and his team are the ones really looking at site, location, where we should be building it. So, and prior to joining Plug, Kevin was at First Solar, so certainly understands and been around the renewable energy industry for a very, very long time. So, and then Raja actually is a part of the CTO office, and Raja is probably one of the few individuals who's been in the hydrogen industry longer than many, I would say. What, over 20 years, my friend?
20 years, yes.
Right, and Raja's technical know-how in terms of thinking through liquefaction, simplifying the design, automation of the plant, IT infrastructure, what that needs to look like, what else can you do to keep moving the envelope, making product technology and what we do better. It's just, I think there's very few people who can probably bring that know-how and skill set to the table. So with that, Kevin, I'm going to turn it to you, my friend, and then I think, where's the clicker? Do you have the clicker?
I actually don't have.
Okay, oh. So, and then you guys can take it away.
So earlier today, we heard a little bit from Professor Brower about hydrogen as a molecule and molecules versus electrons. So the fact that hydrogen is a molecule means we have different options for moving it around, and they have strengths and advantages in areas where they fit. I think that Plug's network has really built up around the liquid model for various reasons we'll get into. But gas is the first thing that comes to mind. Hydrogen's a gas at room temperature and pressure. So we also look a lot at all of these different types of transport modes, from gas, liquid, pipeline, and ammonia. We'll get into it. With gas trucks, pretty easy to get some molecule moving at low volumes, right? It doesn't require quite the capital investment, the infrastructure investment. A liquefier, and to make liquid hydrogen, that liquefier plant costs just about as much as the electrolyzer plant, right, to put it in. So lower barrier to kind of get into gas, but you can't fit a lot on a truck, right? And we were waiting for the perennial, high capacity to gas truck, but when you say or hear that a gas truck could fit, say, 1 ton of gas on a truck, that's not necessarily even your usable volume, right? You might discharge that 70% of that volume. So hard to get above a ton on a truck. But you don't have to go through liquefaction, so it has some advantages in nearby distribution. But that volume per dispatch, per truck drive, right, really drives that cost quite high. Liquid fills a spot that can scale pretty well, we found, right? We can get into regional transport because we can afford to put that truck out for longer. It has about 4 to 5 times the payload of a gas truck. When you kind of think about what you can do with that, it's actually quite a bit. We're not quite to the level of the capital of a pipeline, but the way I think about it is, in terms of what you can do with liquid. I'll give an example just to put it in some numbers here. So when we talk in tons per day, we think about tons per day. We're in the hydrogen business, but energy equivalents, if you're moving, or if you're creating 100 tons per day, that's the equivalent of 160 megawatts of primary energy. So that's the higher heating value of that. So 115 kV transmission line. If you're driving down the road, these aren't the huge, big lattice tower ones, but 115 kV transmission line is kind of a workhorse of the transmission grid. Those big lattice tower ones are usually 200 kV and higher, but 115 kV transmission line is about 150 megawatts. So kind of give you some equivalents. And if we were to repower or change over an airport, a large airport, so think New York or Chicago. If we were to convert 5% of those flights to hydrogen airplanes, it would be about 1 liquid truck per hour, right? So it can actually kind of get us moving. If we were to do a 20% hydrogen blend into a 200 megawatt turbine, significant size like peaker plant, that would be about 1 truck per hour of liquid, right? So liquid can kind of fit that role. And then you kind of say, well, if I'm running 1 truck per hour, and I'm certain I'm going to be doing it for 10 plus years, that's when I start to think about pipelines, right? And pipeline really brings that cost down. General rough rule of thumb, if you think that you're moving 2 tons per day per mile, can justify a pipeline. So if I have 50 tons per day to move, I can build like a 25-mile pipeline, roughly. So we start to think about in those kinds of scale, right, where we can kind of justify that. Beauty about pipelines is that we can really scale up. I mean, we put down 100 tons here, but we can do thousands of tons. So we talked about a liquid truck, 100 tons a day is like 100 megawatts, primary energy. A pipeline, we start to talk about multiple gigawatts, right, through a single pipe. You look at a map of the US, in a pipeline map, several, half a dozen really, pipelines of natural gas really fuel our entire economy here, and those are 4-foot diameter pipelines. It would take about a 6-inch diameter pipe, by the way, to move about 100 tons a day, roughly. And then we think about, pipelines efficiently transporting, interconnecting, add resiliency, right? Trucks, weather events, other types of disruptions. So we get a lot of resiliency out of pipeline, but it takes that, again, multiple trucks per day for multiple years, then we can afford the pipeline. And then ammonia, right? We're also seeing and hearing a lot from the electrolyzer business, from our own business thinking about plants. Ammonia is how we get it across oceans, right? Surprisingly competitive to pipeline when you think about what those transport costs are. Of course, you have to go through perhaps a recracking on the other side, but this is what gets us hydrogen moving, from US to Asia. So that's just how it plays, and give you guys some sense of the magnitudes involved in these different things, and kind of how it's playing out in our own network on the next slide, unless you've got some.
No, I just want to do a shout out. Kevin's here. He's with Genox, and he actually helps us move a lot of our hydrogen as well. So appreciate all the support and the partnership, my friend, and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
So our own network, right, that we've started to build out, we've talked about the plants, Georgia, Tennessee, Louisiana, construction in New York, construction in the first plant that we're looking at in Texas, right, and then West Coast project, California project. So these are really serving our internal need, the mobility need, right, getting liquid hydrogen to be available, reliable across the country, right. As we start to look at those next layer of plants, Midwest, we'll probably do multiple. We're certainly prospecting multiple in Texas, others in the Southwest, right? What we're starting to see is the emergence of other applications into these plants. So combined usage plants, where a liquefier might be a part of that plant, but it's also playing a larger role. So Gulf Coast, for instance, anchoring a liquid project that could serve the mobility market on the back of a larger ammonia project. In the Texas Panhandle area in West Texas, refinery, right? Refinery location, good renewable resource. You might be within tens of miles of a refinery. You're thinking about a longer term contract with that refiner.
Yeah.
So now you're in the position, right, to flow tens of tons per day for 10 plus years. Then we can think about a pipeline that can go tens of miles, right? So we're starting to see this play out in our own network here. What are those markets we see? And this has certainly been accelerated with the IRA and the potential for the production tax credit, but those markets where we'll start to drive connection, we'll start to drive flows of energy, right? Certainly power generation, long duration storage. We'll be giving a little talk on that a bit later. Renewable portfolio standards and resiliency of supply, driving West Coast adoption of hydrogen into power. So again, liquid probably is going to serve that at the beginning stage. We can get to reasonable penetrations of hydrogen into blended turbines even by that, and then those routes will be formed for the larger infrastructure. Refining, I think another one where we see these build out of hubs around refiners being driven by low carbon fuel standards, by larger refiners and oil and gas companies looking to reduce their own direct emissions, and that PTC making clean hydrogen within striking distance. So we start to see these larger hubs built up serving these industrial applications, and of course, as I mentioned, ammonia, largely for export it's the way to export cheaper renewable resources in North America here. We have land, we have good sun, we have good good wind, a lot of pasture, right? So we were exporting that energy, clean energy, into the European and Asian markets. So just examples of where we're seeing it within our own projects and with our partners. So where do we go? What does this look like in the future? And I really, there's a debate. We have a debate internally as well. It's like, does hydrogen become so ubiquitous and there's pipelines everywhere that we quickly move to just, it's available like natural gas is in our houses, and then maybe it really is all gas. I think that's probably pretty far out. I think that we're probably in a situation where, liquid is what gets us moving from these regional production centers where we can build plants of meaningful scale, plants that serve multiple uses, yet we have a redundant and overlapping large, transport network to serve those. Then we can get into this, but looking at liquid also as meaningful amounts of energy you can store as backup power. So replacing on-site diesel tanks and things like this, you can get to pretty large scales with liquid. I think that we can get into some of these constraints. They'll have them. We're scaling up a liquid infrastructure, cryogenic handling, minimizing those boil-off losses across the chain, right? Certainly critical to scaling, and we can kind of get into some of that. And then with pipelines, and it comes up a lot in listening to one of the earlier talks today, it almost sounds like maybe Europe's even further ahead than we are here in North America on hydrogen pipelines, which could make sense. It's more dense, it's more interconnected. They're really taking top-down investment views into hydrogen infrastructure. In the US, the midstream market is really cash-driven, really quite conservative. They're all talking about it. We haven't necessarily seen any big moves, standards blending into natural gas pipelines. Again, we could, and Raja, you could chime in here, but probably we see parallel networks developing, but big first step, right?
Yeah.
Big first step.
Yeah, so between the gas, liquid, and pipeline, I think it's nothing new, right? Like oxygen, nitrogen, the same thing has been happening. All three of them are coexisting today, right? Like people transport liquid, people transport gases, and people, even through the pipeline. Yeah. And it probably would be the same way, right? All the problems, issues are pretty much similar. But with the hydrogen, it's a little bit the way different segments look at the liquid versus gas, and versus gas at a lower pressure versus gas at a 350 bar and 700 bar. All those things are a little different for each segment. Like as from the user point of view, right? They just want to look at how can I satisfy my current demand? Okay, like can I satisfy my current demand by one particular methodology of transport? I remember some of the stations when we used to operate, initially when the station started, they only
back when you were at Air
So only 100 kg you can fill in a station, right? And that's enough those days because you had only 10 or 15 cars counts. But as demand has gone up, even when it becomes 200, right? It's very difficult because even most of the stations you probably have seen it in the spot of the gas station. So when you have to bring 3 times the trailer, the gas station owner says, oh, no, I'm not going to allow you 3 times. Okay, only 1 time is allowed. So during the night time they bring in, they fill and all that issues, right? So now it becomes really it's impossible to do it with the gas, and that's when naturally it becomes liquid. So now, many of the main big stations, that requires at least 200 or 400 kgs, really, they need liquid. Yeah. They cannot do it with the gas, right?
And it gives them that reserve, several days of reserve for the inevitable truck that doesn't show up.
Correct. So now their problem becomes, why not all the stations become liquid? It's not possible because there's not good pumps available yet, to get the 700 bar, right? So in which case, then they have to decide between, can I survive with a small capacity with just gas, or do I really need a high capacity with the liquid? And I'll find a way by which a good technology, and still it is not a solved problem, right? In that case, so yeah, from our side, from moving point of side, we can produce liquid or we can produce gas. We can do it all, but right now there are not too many well-connected pipelines. But plug is basically, that's where we are looking into, what are all the demands, what are the strategies to connect between the demand and supply.
Yeah. So maybe I can just add one quick thing here, right? So one of the, I think, bit of a secret about Plug. Maybe many of you don't know. We actually do have 40 liquid trailers. I mean, like what, 20 high pressure tube trailers now, right? And so I mean, obviously, then also working with a team from Genox, our logistics capability of moving this hydrogen in the liquid and also in the high pressure gaseous form, actually, we feel like we do a pretty good job, actually as good as some of the players that have been around for a very long time. But I thought maybe if I may, guys, right, kind of kick it off with one question here. So it's clear that, small volume, short distance, high pressure gas makes sense, right? More volume, need for storage, you got to go liquid. But shifting, sort of moving beyond that for a second. So Kevin, you've been doing a lot of work, and Rajesh, so have you. What is the biggest challenge for pipeline delivery of hydrogen? What are the, capital is obviously there, right? From a Raja, why don't you talk about it from a technical standpoint? What are some of the biggest challenge? Maybe there is no challenge. Maybe that's the answer, right? Why don't you take that? And Kevin, I know you got a bunch of discussion going on with midstream companies. Why don't you talk about it from what does it take, the volume, return, and if you guys can talk about that.
So there are pipelines, right? Currently, there are quite a few pipelines in US, Gulf Coast. There are pipelines. They are operating profitably. So there are companies, multiple production units, produces hydrogen, puts it in the pipeline, and it's consumed by the companies. But that's completely industrial, right? Like there are well-defined, like large quantities of supply and demand, so the pipeline completely serves, okay? Even in that pipeline, I can tell you guys, like when there is a new supplier comes, like new production unit comes, when that supplier has to join to that pipeline, it's a major study. Like, they don't just add it. The 6 months study goes on in terms of, what are all the different demands? Can we handle that pressure, like from the low to high level demand? So if that is the case, think about our kind of scenario where we are going to have like lot of end users who range of your supply as well as demand, particularly with the renewable and all that, is going to be wide range. So in which case, handling all that, like variations, the pipeline is a different types of problem. It's not the same problem in an industrial case. It's just not that, point to point kind of supply. So in which case, like, and again, when we talk about the community level, multiple, like 3 different companies putting gas into it, what is the guarantee that one person will not pollute that, and you need to shut down the entire pipeline and you need to purge the whole thing and all? There's a lot of problems can happen from that point of view. So that is really the problem. And finally, capex related, definitely from the financial point of view.
The interest is certainly there, from a capital perspective, to want to fund clean infrastructure, right? I think we have to just recognize that whether it's green or blue, it's still somewhat early days, right? There aren't a lot of volumes being produced, so right now it's kind of a bit of an academic question. But I think when you look at the underwriting criteria that the midstream industry uses, it's been around so long, right? They have certain criteria of credit worthy, long operating history, all of this stuff, right? That the industry has developed for oil and gas over the last 100 years, right? That is still new to hydrogen. So, and for good reason, these are companies that move massive quantities of energy, and they are rightly conservative in their approaches to things, right? So I think that it's happening in the background, but that first step where you really see, okay, we're really moving hundreds of tons here, hundreds of tons plus, and we really have extreme confidence on the production side, on the reliability of the production side, the reliability of the offtake. It's going to happen. That isn't a technical issue, right? I don't really believe it is a technical issue holding us up. The pipelines that exist today and that Raj is mentioning too, they're also not what we have in the midstream space, which are open access pipelines, right? Where one can connect in, you can pull off, you pay a tariff rate to go through that pipe, right? It's kind of common infrastructure. What exists in hydrogen is really just point to point. Two people negotiate a contract, they have a bilateral agreement, right? So the market is there. We've done this in the past. We know how to structure these kinds of things, but getting to that critical mass to say it's worth that, these are billion-dollar projects, right? They don't happen easily.
And you are having some discussion.
Absolutely, no, but where we're seeing it mostly, and we have been monitoring some of the larger scale kind of cross-Texas pipelines and stuff like this. They're still, the pieces are there, they have rights of way and this kind of thing, but the structure isn't there to kind of make those go. Where we're mostly seeing it are in those tens of miles where we're moving tens of tons, port areas, near refinery areas, right, where we can kind of bridge those shorter gaps.
Yep.
So that's where it starts.
So Kevin, and then we should turn it to the audience. But one more thing. So you touched on, in your prior slide, you were talking about refining industry, right? So, and obviously you've been having a lot of discussion with a lot of different players on offtake, build, own, operate model. I touched on that a little bit. How has that discussion changed, right? Because you're deep in the weeds on that with those conversations. What are they looking for? Is there a level of comfort to really start displacing gray hydrogen? And can you talk about that?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. And it has changed dramatically over the last 12 months as people have started to internalize what IRA could mean, right? It puts it in striking distance where a refiner will say, look, we know it's going to cost more, but it's close, right? And we want to start doing something. And these are from major refiners, right, that are thinking this way. Prior to that, getting a refiner to kind of go with hydrogen when, it's the last thing on their mind in many ways. But the production tax credit really made that change. And then what we're also seeing a little bit is, when you can hit a sweet spot where someone is actually looking to add more hydrogen capacity. They have an old steam methane reformer. It's not quite as efficient. Then we can start to intercept that next 10 years, 20 years of capital investment where they don't want to necessarily go back to an SMR solution. They're thinking longer term.
Okay. Maybe yes, I know you didn't get to ask your question last time, so please, we'll take that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So we talked about all various factors here. What about some of the external factors like permits, regulations, and NIMBYism that can come in play?
Great question. Everyone's kind of wondering what happens with the first hydrogen pipeline that really tries to go through. It's probably going to be in Texas, so it'll go fine.
Hopefully.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
maybe
right?
it gets opposition from another side. No, but it's something that people are watching really closely, like how do we get massive quantities of energy into New York City, right? Will hydrogen, it's not going to be transmission lines unless they're superconducting, right? So we've got to figure out a way to get massive amounts of energy into these constrained regions. Pipes are the way to move massive quantities of energy. We have to be realistic about that. And you really look at a pipe, look at the impact of a pipe versus what that transmission would look like. And I think it's got to be pipes. We haven't really tested that case yet. We don't know. Some of these pipelines that of projects that we're looking at, people will say, well, we can maybe even use eminent domain here because it's going to be serving multiple users. And it's like, well, do we want the first pipeline to wave the club of, eminent domain? So probably not. So we're trying to be responsible. I hope we get there. I'm optimistic that people will see that we really are trying to clean up our energy use here, and it's the only way to do it.
But particularly in New York, right? There's no way you can send a gas truck or liquid truck through the tunnels.
No.
There is no other
That's going to
choice.
change at some
Pipeline
point,
is the
but it
only
hasn't
way for
yet.
New York.
And and to this day, we're bringing barges of bunker oil up the Hudson River to run oil peakers, right, during critical periods, because that's it's allowed because we've been doing it for the last 100 years.
Yes, sir.
I didn't hear you talk too much about transforming the existing gas pipeline system, because that might be a cheaper way to do things.
That was my question too. Yes.
And it's already ubiquitous. It already goes through New York, right?
Yeah. You wanna?
Yeah, I'll let Raja take that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work going on in terms of blending gases, right? That's a major topic. I mean, when I try to look into how many people are doing across the world, it's amazing how many people. Yeah. Of course, UK is the one that's leading in that effort compared to everybody else. And everybody knows that in Hawaii there's been like lines for hundreds of years, this kind of hydrogen gas. But that's the area where they are trying, right? Blending mainly for energy purpose. But Plug tries to see, if we can take that, even if it is blended pipeline, okay, how can we separate it and make a fuel grade? That's one of our projects. So there are several projects along the pipeline. Same thing with the cost of pipeline. Can we reduce the cost of pipeline? Like ASME approved the fiber reinforced plastic pipeline, right? So we are studying how much, what are all the issues related, because nobody has tried FRP pipeline for hydrogen yet. It exists, it's approved, But we are trying to find out the issues related to that, so that when we into the pipeline market, how we can efficiently do it and also like safely do it. And there's quite a lot of work internally we try to do to get ready for the pipeline time.
Okay. And
But not just blending, what about going to 100%?
We can, the FRP pipeline, no problem, right?
Okay.
Like it's absolutely, in fact, FRP pipeline, imagine like
FRB pipeline as in
fiber reinforced pipeline, plastic pipeline.
Yeah.
So let's say existing pipeline, you just put the FRP pipeline inside inside an existing natural gas pipeline without even worrying about the integrity of the other pipelines.
That's the key, right?
Yeah,
That's the
things
key.
like that.
Yeah.
There are solutions like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, and also like you don't have to cut everywhere or anything, like 2 miles, right? Some of these pipelines are 2 miles, so you can just insert it, and after 2 miles, maybe you cut it there, only that part, and then join it and do the connection both ways, and keep going. And there are quite a lot of new technologies are coming up in this pipeline area, and I think Plug is looking carefully into every one of the technology to see how we can get ready for that.
Pipe inside the pipe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Raja, and Kevin, you've done a lot of work on the cavern from a commercial standpoint, and Raja, you've done a lot of work on the salt cavern, long duration storage from technical standpoint, right? I mean, do you guys want to talk about that some more?
Kevin can talk about caverns.
I mean, that's what really gets us to that future grid state, right? Pipelines connected into large-scale caverns, right? And then we can also get into much more variable production. We can take advantage of curtailed type renewables. So that really ties the whole system together. Obviously, we looked at a project and are still looking at an opportunity in the Northeast where there's a bedded formation that we did the math. It could store 9 hours of New York State's peak energy demand, right? One cavern is big, and then we do the math. We say
very different than
no. This
batteries.
is hundreds of millions of dollars of hydrogen inventory, actually, when you do the math too, right? So the scale of pipelines to integrate cavern storage, right? We really can get there. It's not totally pie in the sky.
Yeah, so again, like 3 types. I think you all know that if you talk about underground storage, there are 3 types. One is the cavern, which is well established. Aquifers and the depleted oil fields, right? Those are the ones, natural gas always been stored, but there's a lot of research going on. How can we store hydrogen? Particularly, for example, for the entire winter or entire one particular quarter where you cannot have any other gas, if you want to use hydrogen, how can we store it and retrieve it? Again, we're talking about large time, then only like cavern is not sufficient. It's relatively smaller, and if you want large storage, you can again like when we really get into the entire economy of hydrogen, and I think my personal opinion is there's no way we can do it without those aquifers and depleted oils. Yeah. But there are lots of issues. Like I agree, like there's so much study going on, and all these studies, like in fact Poland, right? They even like listed all of them and really shortlisted. These are the ones that are perfect for hydrogen. Yeah. Okay. And if every country does that, then already you are ready for such a thing. So perfect. So I think we cannot imagine hydrogen economy without underground storage for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly,
we have underground storage in the oil and gas sector,
yeah.
So it's just the same. I mean, same principles. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe one, please.
Talking a little bit into the future and looking at specifically sort of diverging a little bit away from inherent incumbent infrastructure and developed nations going into developing nations, Brazil, India, Africa especially, and looking at decentralized production and consumption centers of hydrogen demand. How can we leverage what is being done today and will be done in the near future into creating those capacities where fertilizer is manufactured or is produced on site for agricultural production, for the power, for the energy vector to serve the entire sort of, how should we say, a decentralized grid in that sense, but looking at the capital constraints where there's no demand offtake secured, there's no underwritten securitization of that. How can we manage to leverage that and develop those hydrogen centers?
I can, like, right. I think it's not, it's already people are using it. For example, right now, India is importing, Indian oil is importing ammonia, green ammonia from Egypt today. It's not even in the future. Okay, so I think people realize the value of that already, and it's happening. So all we have to do is copy paste what they do.
That sounds simple. We'll leave it at that.
Awesome. I think the red light is blinking now. So again, thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it, and thank you, everybody.
Very good.